Thanks so much.
Ian, how are you, sir?
Adequate.
I, I feel like we haven't talked in years. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. We talked yesterday.
Well, the fact that it's snowing right now, it makes it seem just a little less talking about kayaking and talking about going into the Ottawa Valley.
Fair
It's
enough.
actually a little less of that here right now.
Fair enough. I'm happy to report that it's a really nice day here in Toronto. So, sun shining, no snow yet, but I'm sure it'll come. I'm looking forward to the day that we can do this again, um, on a panel at a conference. Looking forward to that. But let's get going. Really excited to have you here, Ian. Really excited to be chatting. First and foremost, thank you to CanMar for putting on this amazing conference at a time of just where the world of cannabis is exploding. It's just imperative that we have leaders like CanMar in the space to help bring people together. So again, thank you, CanMar, for helping us do this. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Ian Atkinson. I had a chance to speak with him a couple of days ago. Excited to share his story and really dive into some of his thoughts. So, Ian, why don't we start with, everyone I think by now knows your name because I might have said it the last 3 or 4 thousand times. But tell us a little bit more about you, Ian. What's your full name, where are you living today, and of course, a little bit about what you do and how you got to be here.
Okay. So, Ian Atkinson, I actually don't like the term doctor. I'm probably one of the few people who has a hard time with it, partly because there's only one person I feel comfortable actually using the phrase, and that's a woman in her 90s who was a cheerleader when I was just starting out. So I am Ian, I always have been, I always will be. Um, I actually am the co founder of Grow Biotech. I'm the chief scientist with them. It's a UK based company that actually has three separate arms, but they're all integrated into support for patients. So it's a medicinal company with the intent on trying to better enable access of inexpensive and appropriate medicines for patients. So on the R&D side, we're trying to reduce the costs and improve supply chain for patients by improving access to cannabinoids, either through technologies that would help to isolate individual cannabinoids at a reasonable price. At the same time, we're working on the import and export of products into the UK so that if you're a prescribing physician and you want to prescribe a cannabis product, where does it come from? How do you get it? How do you actually import it into the UK? And how do you get it to the patient themselves? And similarly, then there's the trade aspect, which would be import and export between jurisdictions, because the challenge of trying to get enough medicine to where it's needed means that certain jurisdictions will be able to manufacture, certain jurisdictions will want to receive. How do you actually navigate that process and trying to help to navigate not only the regulatory, but also some of the challenges that come about because it has to be EU GMP going into Europe, for example.
Wow.
That's
Um, so that's it. I mean, that's all, right? That's incredible. You have your hands in so many different important facets of the way in which information moves, cannabis moves, knowledge moves. It's really, really beautiful to see. But what struck me about in talking to you initially was you're doing all of these things, and for everyone looking for coming into the industry, that's extremely daunting, right? Obviously, not a doctor, but doesn't like being called doctor, at the top of his game, building a company. So, one of the things I asked you the other day that I'd love for you to share with the team is, what's your journey here? How did you acquire the skills necessary to be able to lead an organization that's building such important pieces of this industry?
So I think the problem is it almost seems like I actually had a plan. So there was a lot of serendipity. So I have a PhD in plant molecular biology and biochemistry. So I'm actually a botanist by training, but I didn't really work in the plant space for many, many years because when I left my PhD, I went into nutritional sciences at Berkeley. And in doing that, got cross-trained into other areas. After my postdoc, I actually joined a small biotech company in California, in Silicon Valley. And got to learn more about genomics and got to learn a whole lot more about the genetics aspects of not only plants but humans and across the board in an area called microarrays, so high throughput genomics tools. That seems like it would actually be directly related into the cannabis space, and it is, but it wasn't with intent. It was because of opportunities, and because when there's change, there's a real interesting dynamic that happens when you find that you're not enjoying yourself in a particular job, and so you change it.
Yeah.
And I really liked the opportunities that if I wasn't happy with the direction, maybe it was because I was doing things that I wasn't particularly enamored with, I didn't have passion for, I would actually try a different opportunity. So when I was at Molecular Dynamics, they got acquired by Amersham Pharmacia, which eventually got acquired by GE. So I got to see a change of how things were run in a startup versus more of a large multinational company.
Absolutely.
Um, from there, I actually went back to Canada, returned to Canada, and became an academic for a couple of years. And as an industrial scientist coming from California, going back to Canadian academic environment, it wasn't for me. It wasn't something that I found passion with. And so I went back to industry, and I joined a small startup in in San Diego called Illumina. And so now they grew on their own. They're now, last I checked, a $34 billion market cap.
Company, yeah, I was going to say. Wow, okay. Okay, keep going, keep going.
Came back to Canada to deal with ailing parents because I grew up in Edmonton. And so after getting my PhD at the U of A, I figured I wasn't going to be coming back, but I came back to Alberta. And while I was here, my best friend asked me to start a small startup with him. It was a medical device company. That product's now got US FDA clearance, it's got CE mark in Europe, and it's being sold in 40 countries.
Wow.
So not too many botanists who have medical device background.
No.
But it's understanding that all of those pieces are lessons learned. They're opportunities to gain from the opportunity you're in. You might be working at McDonald's, but you learn a lot about supply chain and you learn a lot about manufacturing. It's those opportunities, using those opportunities as they're presented to you.
Incredible. So, I mean, let's drill into that a little bit because, you know, for someone coming into the space today, you know, whatever job that they're in right now, how do you start to, you know, you kind of mentioned it with whether you're working at McDonald's, you learn a little bit about the supply chain, but how do you really take advantage of the opportunity that you're working in so that you can acquire, you know, some subset of skills that can be applied into the cannabis industry? Because again, there's no playbook for skills in this industry. So help us understand a little bit more about how you capture opportunity in that moment, which obviously led you to some success.
Well, I think the easiest way is to actually just cherish the moment, live in the moment, and make every opportunity the best opportunity that it is. I love the idea that you can actually get a start in this industry from the get-go, even if it's at a low-level, entry-level job. You can actually grow relatively quickly because it's a very dynamic industry, especially when it comes to the fact that in the last session with Dr. Tony, there was a talk about an improvement in sophistication and an improvement in rigor that's required. As there's a requirement for EU GMP, as there's a requirement for novel foods discussions and the regulatory side of things, people who are just entering the industry may get an opportunity to learn about the regulations and the regulatory path. And maybe that's a passion point for them, that they actually, I don't know anybody who actually went into regulatory with that primary intent. They actually redirect from something else. Maybe it was biology, maybe it was chemistry, maybe it was virology. But the fact is, when they went into their primary research areas and got their bachelor's degree, they didn't actually intend on becoming a regulatory person.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're in a medical, like a clinical medicine field, like you've got a master's degree in data management for clinical trials. Perhaps that leads you into a role of a medical science liaison so that you can actually interact with physicians from an education perspective to teach them about cannabis, to teach them about prescribing. So there's some really cool areas where opportunities present themselves from within organizations that you would never have thought. So if you throw yourself into the opportunity that you've got, management will see that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, I think, we're going to zone in on your role in a second and what some of the stuff you're doing at Grow. But I think that's important for everyone to know, because it's really easy to see you as a leader of this company now and just know that think that you have everything figured out, right? So you don't have everything figured out. But taking from different places and taking from different environments and being intentional about the opportunity that you're capturing is really, really key. So we're gonna dive into that a little bit, and I'm gonna stop you after the next question to plug in my laptop. But what I will ask is, so you're doing a lot of great work across the globe right now, specifically, obviously facilitating a lot of good work in the UK. Help us understand the flow of information between yourselves, doctors, some of the work that you're doing. I mean, how do you even start to, because there's no playbook, how do you even start to find a common ground where you start to actually, have those meaningful conversations that start to create something that, again, hasn't been created before?
I think the easiest way to start the discussion is to go from the patient side. So if you actually consider what they need prescriptions. They need educated doctors to give them what is the most appropriate medicine for their condition. You would hope, first off, that it would be at the beginning of the algorithm rather than at the end of the algorithm. But that's just the nature of the laws and my own personal beef.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact is that that physician needs training. And if there's not enough randomized control trials, because those trials cost $100 million, the likelihood is they're going to have evidence that's going to be a little bit shaky. Educating the patient, educating the physicians on the quality of the data and understanding what is needed to make better decisions is one step. And I think that's the initial step to being able to do what we do. From a technology side, if we're trying to make products that are the most appropriate products for the patient, we need to know what the physicians are willing or capable of prescribing. If we want to make metered dose inhalers, so if you want to make a salbutamol type inhaler so that you can just inhale a spray, what does that need to look like? Would a physician even prescribe that product? And so you need a formulations chemist. You need somebody who can actually help with not only getting that product in the right format, but also then doing all the testing to make sure that that is the right format for the delivery of that product. Absolutely. Maybe it's better suited as a tablet or as a gel cap. And at that point, you have brought in all of these domain experts. Either you've brought them in-house or you've actually contracted to small firms that actually do pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So there's a lot of expertise that's being brought into the industry that wasn't in the cannabis space before.
Absolutely. I have a question. Maybe I'm going to just take a pause so I can plug in my laptop so I don't lose you. But with the rise of cannabis and what you're doing, especially leading from the patient side, it always begs the question around big pharmaceuticals, right? And changing attitudes around big pharmaceuticals and what the impact is going to be. So I'm curious, I mean, I guess a two-part question. Number one, how do you foresee, just this next boom in cannabis impacting pharmaceuticals on it from a global perspective? And also, when you are educating these doctors and physicians on changing patient attitudes, I mean, how are they responding to cannabis as a medicine today?
So I think there's 2 points to your question. One is that pharma has been in the cannabis industry for a long time. The difference being that they've been using modified cannabinoids in API grade traditional pharma style. So there are existing cannabinoids that have been on the market for a while now, maybe not extracted from cannabis, maybe synthesized and maybe modified accordingly, but they've been in the cannabis space. They just haven't been in the plant-based extraction cannabis space. So if you consider that traditional North American European pharma is more like single dose, single API with excipients, and a single dose regimen, And then you compare that to Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, where you're looking at decoctions of whole plant, where that whole entourage or pharmacosynergy is actually related. The actual plant-based medicines are more like the whole plant utilization component, where you're actually trying to do extracts, you're trying to do decoctions and macerated boils. So therefore, they don't really fit to one another. It's very hard to get a traditional Chinese medicine into a North American pharmacopoeia. So I think the challenge with that is you have to kind of bridge the gap between the two styles. If you want to be doing pure THC based pills, you're going to have all the problems of a pure THC pill with regard to its anxiety and its side effects. You're going to have a problem because you're not going to get any of the benefits of terpenes or bioflavonoids or any of the complementation that happens with a whole plant. So the education is not just of API grade pharmacy, it's not just of whole plant utilization, it's where in the middle can you meet? Because you have to get the normalization and the consistency of a product that would be appropriate for a North American style prescription. At the same time, you want all of the benefits of multiple compounds from the Ayurvedic style of medicine, where you're actually taking this to help to keep you well. And when most people consume cannabis, they're not consuming to an endpoint, they're consuming to their own, they feel that they've got their effect that they're looking for. They're not doing it from a concentration. I'm going to take exactly 1.2 milligrams to get that. They do it to an endpoint. So the fact is that's a different way to prescribe for a physician.
Oh, that's a really good point. That is a very different way to prescribe. So, I mean, like, what's the starting point there? Like, how do you end up building the prescription out from that perspective if it is based on the endpoint and not, that dosage, for instance?
Go low, start slow.
Go low, start slow.
Is the fact that if you can't get the effect with the primary prescription, you have good constant dialogue with the physician so that you can actually get to that point. So that's part of it. It's part of the interaction that's required, is that it's a different way of doing medicine, but it's also an appropriate way of doing medicine where the physician is more involved, especially in some of these cases like some of the prescriptions are being made for things like multiple sclerosis with spasticity, or perhaps it's with tremor associated with epilepsy. You have to actually consider, where are you getting the effect, and is the dosage correct, and how do you increase the dose without actually overshooting? These are just some simple questions. It takes good education from the medical science liaison, good randomized control peer-reviewed literature to help to prove that this is the right indication for this particular compound or set of compounds. It's just the same thing that's being done in pharmacy for many, many years.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Ian. And I have a whole host of questions, and I know we only have 10 minutes left here, and maybe I'll save some of those questions for just you and I. I know Raphael has a question, and we'll get to that. He's curious about which are the most common lab analysis daily routines for raw materials and finished products inside of a cannabis facility, which we'll get to. However, that's going to be the last question, Raphael. I hope that's okay. And one more question, Ian, for you. And I asked you this the other day. Well, actually, two questions for you, really quick. Number one, what are 2 or 3 global market trends that you see coming on board in the next 2, 3, 5 years? I mean, you have such an interesting lens and viewpoint on the global market. So help us understand from that perspective some trends that are arising.
Okay. I think one of the most obvious ones is sophistication and rigor, is that there's a greater expectation that this is going to be less cowboy. This is going to be where EU GMP is going to be mandated for any product coming into Europe. And that goes all the way back to the farm to a certain extent, in that if it's a processor who's got the EU GMP status, they're going to be going back and doing supplier audits on those farms. So the QP in the processor is going to be looking at those all the way back to entire processes. Are there pesticides? Are there heavy metals? Is there pesticides on blowover from some of the neighbors? Kind of challenges. So not just C of A's, but also making sure that they have a responsibility because they're going to be held accountable for that. There's
Yeah.
also a greater rigor that's coming in the products that are being expected because, based on the conversation we had yesterday, if you're Jameson Vitamins and you had a product that had multiple components in it, and it has a known amount of vitamin C and a known amount of vitamin D, and you don't know exactly how much of the rest of the compounds are in there, they may not have any of it in there, they may have some of it in there. It's going to be very inconsistent. There's going to be a lot of batch to batch variability. Nobody would buy that product.
No.
We're going to see a lot more of that type of rigor being introduced. And so there's going to be bigger error bars when it comes to the plant. There's going to be less error bars when it comes to value add products that go down the path. There's going to be more consistency, not just in THC and CBD, but in some of the other components as well. As they start becoming more important, CBG, CBN, and any of these rarer cannabinoids, there's going to be a rigor to make sure that there's a consistent amount of those if that is in fact in the product. So there's going to be standards for the analytics lab. So going to the question about most common analytics analysis, that's a tough one because the raw material is going to be all over the place. If the top of the plant and the bottom of the plant have different cannabinoid profiles, it's going to be very difficult to actually do a test of 2 or 3 acres worth of product and getting a very consistent result across the board.
Absolutely. Raphael, I hope that answered your question. And please do follow up with us if you do have any more questions. And I'd leave that open to everyone. We want to be engaging as possible. So fire us your questions. Fire us any questions you have after this panel in the CanMar link. And Ian and I'll try and address them together. Who knows, Ian? Maybe we'll be on another panel together. With a couple minutes left, I really want to drill into 2 areas. Number one, there's a lot of individuals who are looking to come into this space with a lot of great degrees and with a lot of, with big brains and who are doing big things across the world. What's some advice you might give to them coming into the space, and take it from the lens of, if you could give yourself, your younger self, some of that advice and you were just entering into this space for the first time or looking to get in, cannabis was 2 years old. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell everyone? What are your thoughts? Help us understand that a little bit.
I think the first thing is going to be that not everything is actually directly cannabis related, but it's very useful information to know. I would never have thought that my background in medical devices would directly translate into cannabis knowledge or cannabis expertise. But having gone through the medical device process, a quality management system is absolutely key in understanding how to run a facility, how to deal with SOPs and how to deal with this. So the opportunity that you may have right now or about to partake, that opportunity may be something that's very telling or very educational, even though it's not directly related to specifically the education path that would be. So it's not everyone has a traditional education path. That said, passion is good, skills are better. So if you go to college, if you go to university and actually get a degree in that regulatory space, it's going to pay dividends because there's going to be a big demand for people who have understanding of quality management systems and of SOPs and the documentation necessary to that. If you've got a background that doesn't necessarily exactly fit, but you've actually gained as much as you can in business development or perhaps in some of the other areas which are not quite so technical, that's actually cross-training. So I never actually got formalized training in an MBA, but I have to be sitting on boards and I have to actually deal with the finances. I actually have to deal with the finances of Grow in terms of budgeting. That wasn't something that gets trained in my PhD. So learn while the opportunities present themselves.
That was definitely not something that was taught in your PhD, Ian. Wow. Okay, so we have a question here by Sam. Sam is asking, which cannabinoids seem especially promising to you going forward in the industry? Ian?
Ooh, well, okay. I'll answer that with 2 points. I think the most interesting cannabinoid to me is actually THCV. And the reason is because THCV is one of those compounds that does something that nobody expected it would do. Partly it's the skinny weed. That's right. THCV is actually gives you the anti-munchies. So it reduces the munchie context. But in small amounts, that's exactly how it could be overused, or it could be overwhelming of a system. It's a homeostatic compound. And therefore, if you take too much of it, it may actually make you sad in the same way that compounds have black box. So there are cannabinoids. There are cannabinoids that were formulated in a lab that look an awful lot like their response would be very much to THCV's profile. And these compounds actually, they lead to depression, they lead to suicidal tendencies. So it might be helpful in the weight loss industry if it's taken in moderation and helps to balance homeostasis. If you overtake it, it would be extremely important to understand where that overshoot would be. So that's from a scientific, from a purely geek perspective. In terms of the other compound, like sort of the secondary part to the question, are there other compounds that excite the industry? I think CBG is the next big thing. So it's going to commoditize very much like CBD has, with regard to its pricing is going to drop for the API grade materials. I think it's very interesting because we haven't really explored it in much detail. It is the parent compound to both CBD and to THC in terms of the biochemical pathway. So there's going to be some commonalities and some differences between these compounds. But I think there's some interest to be had, not just from a pure product perspective, but also from a clinical trial perspective. What could it be used for? What should it be used for? I don't really know the answer to this. And I think what's going to happen is if more people start manufacturing with high CBG strains, we're going to start seeing more high CBG products showing up on the market. And we'll start to find out some of that if it's done in a rigorous and appropriate manner.
Wow, I just learned so much, and I hope everyone did as well. I didn't even know THCV existed, Ian. So thank you for that. Wow, that's fantastic. So I mean, with just closing thoughts, Ian, anything you want to add for any closing thoughts, anything that you want to tell the industry, anyone who's watching, you should see the comments right now, if you can, but you're like a rock star right now. It's fascinating. People are yelling, yeah, like I'm telling you, it's awesome right now in these comments. But I love Cannabinoid Geeks. This is great. Perfect. Rockstar Ian, you're killing it, man. Anything you want to just leave the group with before we let you go and get on with your day and your weekend?
I think the total number of cannabinoids are probably, if you consider all of the isoforms, all of the chemistry of it, we're talking over 120, 140. We don't know the exact number. Wow. But this plant has such a plethora of really cool things to study, not just from an academic and from a basic science perspective, but from an applied and using these products for other good in society. I would love to see more work being done at the academic level, at the industrial level, even just at the clinical level, to start seeing how these compounds could be, should be, might be used. They don't even have standards for most of them so that they can run them in the analytics lab. So groups that make these compounds, groups that have the ability to test these compounds for different preclinical and clinical type analyses, what could they do? I don't know.
So if I understand it correctly, you're essentially saying we're 0.0001% into actually knowing what we can possibly do with this beautiful, amazing plant. And as a result, as we start to learn more about it, this industry is just going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to ensure that there's new research coming out and new abilities to use this plant in so many different ways by isolating these compounds. I mean, it's it's amazing. And we have
So,
people like yourself, Ian, to thank for helping pave the way. So I hope you enjoyed speaking with me as much as I enjoyed speaking with you. And for anyone looking, I guess to maybe reach out, but I don't want to bombard you on LinkedIn or anything, but maybe I don't know how that's working on the CanMar side. Maybe shoot Ian a note, or shoot me a note, and I can reach out, send Ian that note, and I'm sure you all have many questions. But again, thank you so much for your time, Ian. I really, really appreciated speaking with you.
thanks so much. I just put my email on the chat. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you
Cheers.
so much for letting my passion come through.
Always.
I,